Hello, everyone, and welcome to Asian Viewpoints with Mary Sitt. Our guest today calls himself an accidental historian. Peter Tao is an architect by trade. He is the co founder and owner of Tao Lee Associates, soon to celebrate 30 years in the St. Louis area. But in his spare time, he loves to delve into the past and uncover fascinating stories of the Chinese and Asian Americans who once lived there. Peter, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So you're an architect who has a sort of side hustle as accidental historian. How did you get into that?
It really didn't it happened probably fairly recently in history terms in 2017, really. Um, a local organization, the OCA, which is advocacy for NHPI, wanted to do a tribute to my father who was turning 100 years old in
Wow.
2017. So I was digging into his memoir, which he had already drafted, and I really just started piecing together some history. So that's where it all started.
Okay. You recently launched your website, accidentalhistorian.co, last December, I believe, a website that explores your family history. What do you hope people take away from learning about your family?
Well, I think a lot of their stories are simply current stories for any immigrant. Um, and I think you'll find that in some of my writings. I don't really try and do it like a historian. I'm trying to bring forth things that might be relevant and applicable and relatable to modern day people. Um, and mainly because I felt like I didn't have that when I was growing up.
Your parents grew up in China during a time of poverty and corruption and warlords, all of that. How did learning about them and their past as younger people influence the way you think about them?
Well, we always joke in our family and amongst friends that my parents seemed so modern when they were growing up in China. Everything from the photographs they were posing in, they always looked very stylish. They
Mhm.
weren't looking, that I don't know if it's a stereotype, but the way most people perceive China in those days.
Right, that drab look with the stern expression on their face, right?
Right. And and they were always curious and they always seemed to be optimistic, looking for new opportunities. So those lessons are what really what you grab onto and you admire and you try and emulate as you kind of live our own lives.
Let's take a look at the personal gallery you have on your website. You start off with a photo of your track star dad. So he was an athlete, right?
Yeah, he was actually what we would call a super athlete, and track and field was his main area. Um, and what's pretty remarkable was, and this is a um, story that he tells quite humbly, he was the record holder in China for the what's now called the triple jump. He calls it the hop, skip, and jump was what it
Okay.
used to be called. And what happened was in the leading up to the 1936 Olympics was all the turmoil going on in China. So by that time, he had left he was just moving about the country to stay safe. And China never had their Olympic trials. So he said humbly that we never had the trials. I happened to be the record holder at the time. He doesn't know how he would have performed, right? It's always performance based at an Olympic trial. So he said that never happened. I don't know if how I would have done, but that was the 1936 Olympics in Berlin with Hitler and Jesse Owens. So he says I could have been there perhaps, but again, he goes, I'll never know.
You have a photo of when your dad was stationed in Kunming, China during World War II, and your mom is sitting in front of a Jeep or on the Jeep, and she's looking very pretty and very happy and hopeful and has this confident look on her face. Tell me about that photo.
Yeah, they were obviously very young. He was right out of school. So he had graduated as an engineer, and this was the beginning of his journey and being stationed in various places. And Kunming was one of them. He worked for the China CTC, the
Mhm.
China Transportation Company. It was a quasi public private support agency. And basically, they were doing logistical support for the movement of supply line from Burma. And
Okay.
so in Kunming, if you know the true story, that's where the Flying Tigers were stationed, the voluntary Air Force.
Mm,
And part of what he was doing was to get fuel from Burma to Kunming.
okay. And then your dad took literally his slow boat from China to the United States, 22 days at sea. I think
Yeah.
it's ironic that the name of the boat was Missouri, and he was headed to Missouri, right?
Yeah.
And then he settled there in St. Louis, and that's where you were born?
Yeah. So he came here for school. That's a pretty interesting story, too. Um, right after the war, after the Japanese surrendered, China had given an incentive to some of their young um, talents. And they said, if you can find opportunity to further your education, you'll get some sort of stipend. I don't think it was very much. And my mother recalled her middle school classmate was in St. Louis at Washington University because we never could understand how did you possibly know this little school in
Right.
1947. And they wrote her, um, and then that alone is an interesting kind of imagine the postal service back then and the time lag. But they would eventually get a catalog from them, from the university, and he would scour it, see that they had, interesting program and apply. Um, the fun fact is that this woman and her husband are the parents of Steven Chu, who was the energy secretary under the Obama administration and Nobel Laureate.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Small world, really, right?
A lot of there's so many there's so many connections.
Um, Peter, of all these photos of your family, which one speaks to you the most and why?
Um, I don't know. I mean, I think one that is really dear to me is actually it's literally the month before my father would pass away. I think there's a family photo in there where it's us at Thanksgiving and we're just sitting with them outdoors by a fire pit and it kind of captured, and my kids are grown up, and it really captured everything that they were trying to promote and instill, which was very much family helping each other, family educating each other. It wasn't just out of loyalty.
Right.
My father was a persistent and sometimes too persistent educator. My son will always say, "Yeah, no matter what I did, grandpa would always tell me how to do it better or whatever." But that was all valuable.
Another section of your website is called, Photographs One Perfect Shot, and you highlight historical photos, not your family, but just historical photos of other Chinese people who lived in St. Louis. I love how you set up each photograph with a little, you describe the photo very simply, and then you ask a question. What do you think this means? Or what do you think after you describe something that maybe the viewer hadn't noticed, like, "Oh, yeah, he is sort of smiling." So, and then it makes us curious about that photograph. So you set up this thing and cause us to be curious. Um, there's a photo in there, I have to talk about this one. It's called Miss Chinatown, and I started looking at it and going, "Oh, she's pretty." And then I started reading about it, it said Sue Sit, and I went, "Sue Sit? I think she might be a cousin of mine." And then you kept going about it in the caption about how Sue Sit had a cousin named Sam Sit, also an architect, and I thought, "Okay, Sam Sit is my Uncle Sam, and his younger brother is my dad, Hong Sit." Tell me about that whole photograph and what you found out.
Yeah, that's what's so fascinating about just this whole history pursuit. So we knew that there was this photo of Sue Sit being crowned. Eventually, we would discover that the young man crowning him would be Wing Liang, and we would eventually tie Wing to another, his sister, Annie Liang, who was often the face of Chinese Americans in the downtown Chinatown because she was uh, they were basically a legacy family. They ran one of the most popular restaurants, Asia Cafe. It's the last restaurant standing in Chinatown, and so there's all these little connections and stories. Well, as we kept pursuing, and eventually we found um, Wing Liang's daughters in Chicago. We eventually connected, became friends. They started giving us information, donating things. And we discover in the oral history that their own daughter, so the granddaughter of Wing, he he mentions being inspired by a conversation with a young graduate from Wash U named Sam Sit. Sam Sit was down at the restaurant just for some community dinner event, and he started talking to Sam, and that gave him the courage to be curious about going on to college.
Wow. One conversation.
Yes, one conversation, he approached his parents. No one had ever gone to college. He said, "I'd like to go try going to college." He did that, became very successful at a big corporation here in St. Louis. And those are just those interesting little stories that surface. And then you realize how people, it doesn't matter what era, they're learning from each other or they're being inspired by each other.
Peter, you have a knack for telling stories from the past. I was reading through your website, and it's not like some boring, Britannica encyclopedia thing where it's in 1904, blah, blah, blah. We just go on and on. Your eyes are glazing over everything. You tell it in sort of a quirky, funny way, or you say something and then you ask a question to the reader to make us and get us engaged. Where does this passion for history come from?
I think it's just really the result of not getting that story told. I mean, I didn't even really think about it until more recent times. And then even my children coming up and saying, "How is it that we don't know about, whatever, the Chinese Exclusion Act? Or how is it that we don't know about blah, blah, blah?" And then I just realized, you know, that's the same question I should have asked, but I didn't because it was kind of less surrounding all of us at the time, right? We were just trying to survive and fit in. And then when you think back and see how it could have helped us in some ways. So that's really when I had that aha moment, which was probably during the whole pandemic, is when it really kind of surfacing in deeper conversations. That's where I then started saying, "Oh, well, yeah, someone needs to kind of write about this."
Okay, well, Peter, thank you so much for sharing your history with us and your stories. It's been fascinating.
Thank you very much for having me.
If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button below and be sure to subscribe to this channel so you never miss a show. I'm Mary Sitch. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.